Now is, if the blood is not sprinkled, but the limbs are brought up on the altar, does it reach that level of holiness, the fact that it's brought on the altar, that it becomes a sacrifice, and if someone would have personal benefit from it, I know he'd maybe take like the oil of it and smear it on himself or on his shoes to, on his little, I don't know, it does some sort of personal benefit that he violates Me'ilah. Does it attain that status just from being brought on the altar? So Amarlei, as Rabbi Yochanan's question was, do you have to take it off the altar? Rabbi Ami says, why don't you ask about Me'ilah? Does it attain the status of Me'ilah? Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan responds, Me'ilah like mi boile. I never had that question. Dizriku the kavu lehu b'Me'ilah. It's only the sprinkling of the blood that makes it a status of Me'ilah. Kikami boile. What was my question? Yerida. Do you take it off? Upashit. And he responded, Lo yerda. You don't take it off. Ve'im Me'ilah. And there is no Me'ilah. There's no Me'ilah because the blood wasn't sprinkled, and you don't take it off the altar. It remains on the altar, which may be where Ula got it from.
Is he saying that he doesn't dispute the fact that if it's blood on the altar, that
you don't take it off?
He's just saying with the blood. He's just questioning whether or not the sprinkling the blood.
No, there was no sprinkling of the blood here.
Okay.
When it was put on the altar when it shouldn't have, because you have to wait for the blood to be sprinkled. But because once it goes on the altar, it's shameful to take it off. You leave it on the altar. Rabami was questioning, what about if someone has benefit from the animal? Why don't you ask that? Is it considered Me'ilah? Is it considered that you've had benefit from a sacrifice? This is not really a sacrifice yet because the blood wasn't sprinkled, and it's of lesser holiness. The kachim, there's always Me'ilah. Kachim kalim, you have to wait for the blood to be sprinkled. But here, it went on the altar, and you see you're leaving it up there. So maybe there's Me'ilah already. He says no, there's no Me'ilah. He also says you don't take it off. Okay. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Hachi. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak has a different version of this. Amar Abchia Barabba. Abchia Barabba says, Voy Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan had a question. Imuri kachim kalim shehelan lefnei zrikas daman. The limbs of a sacrifice that's of secondary holiness, of lesser holiness, that was brought up on the altar before the blood was sprinkled. Yesh ben Me'ilah elai. Is there Me'ilah or not? In other words, according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the initial question was, is there Me'ilah? Amalei Rabami asked him, B'tibayilach Yerida. Why don't you ask if you take it off the altar? Amalei Yerida like mibayili. Dinasalach mishum. I never had a question about taking it off the altar, because that it becomes the food of the mizbeach. Kikamibayili Me'ilah. My whole question was, is there Me'ilah? Upashit hachi la yerdu vein ben Me'ilah. And he responded that you don't take it off the altar and there is no Me'ilah. So the halacha is always the same. The question is, what was his initial question, and what was his? The answer is the same also. Be'ilu lai haya psulan goes through a list of things that were not their invalidation did not come from the holiness. They had an invalidation before it was even became a carbon, or before it was brought to the temple. It was already invalid. So those, if they're brought on the altar, you take them off. However, Rabbi Akiva said one of those cases was a mum. If it had a blemish, Rabbi Akiva says no. A blemish is if it's brought on the altar, it remains there, even though it had the blemish before it came into the sanctuary, or before it was a sacrifice.
So I'm saying they're mechalik with him, everybody else, with Rabbi Akiva?
Regarding a blemish.
So he says if there was a blemish before it was brought to the base of Mikdash, it was brought on, you don't take it off, Rabbi Akiva says. And we learned that from a bird.
Yeah, we're going to see. That's this Gemara. I spoke it out, but we're going to see this. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Akiva was only permitted the slit in the eye because that would be permissible by a bird. By a bird, only if it's missing a limb or missing a limb would be a mum, but just a slit in the eye is not a mum. But this is only if it was sanctified before it had the mum. That means that it became holy. It had to have become holy, and then it gets the mum. It gets the mum before you bring it into the. It gets the mum before you brought it on the altar, before you slaughtered it and all of that. but you sanctified it first, or else it never would have attained the sanctity of a sacrifice. So the order would be like this: you sanctify the animal, it gets a mum, and then you bring it to the base of Mikdash, and you bring it on the altar. Rabbi Kiva admits that a elevation offering is only a male. Let's say it's a female. Now, by a bird, there's no such thing. There's no limitation in the sacrifices that the birds need to be male or female. You can hardly figure it out by kaparis if it's a male or female. They tell you this is a female. You're like, yeah, right. You can only find out in the morning when it crows, whatever. Okay, I don't know how they know. So
by the color.
I don't think they can tell.
Ask Don. Seriously.
I'm saying that he is in the business. Okay, so so Rabbi Kiva admits that just because it's allowed by a bird to have male, female, that there's no distinction, that doesn't mean that anything that's by a bird that's going to be by an animal, automatically it's going to be allowed. If it's on the altar, we're going to leave it on the altar. Just because we find that a mum in the eye, because it's not a mum by a bird, by an animal, if it's slaughtered and brought on the altar, we're going to leave it there. That doesn't mean that the male animal, female animal, when it shouldn't have been, that if you bring it on the altar, you're going to leave it there, because by a bird you don't have that distinction. Why? Because that's similar when you sanctified it. The blemish was there before you sanctified it. How did you sanctify a female oila? It already had its blemish. It never acquired the sanctity. The mum came first. No, we're not saying that a female is a mum. What we're saying is that it was the wrong type for this sacrifice. So therefore it never attained that holiness. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah is a very interesting question. Rabbi Yirmiyah is famous for his interesting questions. We said that an animal that's sodomized is not valid for a sacrifice. What about if a bird is sodomized? That means a male, a human, a man lives with a bird. What happens to that bird? Is that bird considered? Now, why should? Of course, we would say that it's not valid, right?
Right.
He says no. Mi amrinan, do we say mina behema lahitz yetzerev v'senyerva? The pasuk excludes. It says from the animal. That means not all animals. Which animal not? An animal that was sodomized. Why? Because it has two cases there. It has either it was a man that lives with a animal, whether male or female, or a male animal that lives with a woman. You need to have both. If the animal could have lived with a woman, then we would have the problem of a man living with the animal. But if you don't have the animal living with the woman, then you don't have the problem of a man living with the animal. What we mean to say is that a bird cannot live with a woman. A man could theoretically or potentially live with a bird. A man can live with a bird, but a bird doesn't have an organ to live with a woman. And so therefore it doesn't have the same law as an animal. Who cares? It was a sin. The sin was committed with this bird. What's the problem? Amar Rabba Tashma. Rabba says, come and listen. Rabbi Kiva Machshe b'Bali Mum, Rabbi Kiva says that an animal that has a mum is still kosher if it's on the altar. You don't take it off. Vim Isa. And if we say that a bird that's on the altar, if we say that a bird that was sodomized is kosher, Nachshanami Benirva. Why doesn't he say that just like it's kosher by a bird that's sodomized, so to an animal that's sodomized? Because he said that a mum and a bird is not a problem, so therefore a mum on an animal is not a problem.
If
So if sodomized
and murba are different. How are you going to say?
I know, but we're making a comparison. We're saying that anything that would have been valid by a bird, b'di'evad is valid by an animal.
Okay.
So if it would have been valid by a bird, so it should have been b'di'evad valid by an animal, by a nirva, by a sodomite. Nachnami but a nirva, hail v'kosher v'ifas. Shema mina, we see from this that it's not kosher. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Afananami Tanina. We also learned this in a Mishnah or a Brisa. A nirva v'maktzava nevad vestan and mechir v'tumtum adregas kulam etam v'gadim abesav liya shema mina. Says that a nirva says clearly a bird that was sodomized. All of these birds, all of these animals, whether it's sodomized, it was worshipped, or it was exchanged for a dog, or it was given as payment to a prostitute, or a tumtum, or an androgynous. All of these are they make a person tamei if it wasn't slaughtered.
That's not the way he translates it here.
Because this is just by emotion.
He says they all contaminate clothes with tuma
Right.
via the throat.
Because they're invalid for a sacrifice, and malika was done on them. These are all types of birds. Because they're invalid for a sacrifice, so therefore you weren't allowed to do malika on it, and you did malika on it because malika is only valid for a sacrifice. Otherwise, you would have to do shchita. Otherwise, you would need to slaughter it. But here, you considered it a sacrifice, and it's not valid. So therefore, it would make a person tummy that swallows it. Now, the rule is that a kosher bird that's not slaughtered, when a person swallows it, it makes him tummy and his clothing tummy, and not by touching it, by swallowing it, by eating it. So, because this is a kosher bird that's not valid for a sacrifice, and it wasn't slaughtered, because malika was done, he thought it was a sacrifice. So it's not a valid sacrifice. It's considered like a bird that wasn't slaughtered, and therefore it would make him tummy. But the case, what we're getting out of this is that a nirva is not a kosher sacrifice for a bird that was sodomized. Okay, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kainim, he says that his father would push off animals that had a mum from the altar. Micah Mashmalan, what's Rabbi Chanina Skana Kainim telling me what his father would do? What his father did. Iba Yisema Maisa. If you want, I could tell you that he's just telling me a story, which is nice. Maisa Kamashma, he's telling me that they actually did that. Iba Yisema, if you want, I could say, my doicha, what does it mean that he would push off kalach yad backhandedly? That means he wouldn't push it off in an irrespectable way. He pushed it off in a respectable way. Shem Shem Allah. Just like if it goes up, you don't take it down, so too if it goes down, you don't take it up. Amarula, Ula says, when did we learn that you don't take it off? If it goes up, and you don't bring it up. If it went down, that's only if the fire didn't start on it, didn't start to burn it. But if it was already starting to be burnt, and then somehow it popped off the altar, then you put it back on. Rav Mari Masni Aresha. Rav Mari learned it the way that we just said it. However, Rav Chanina Misura Masnei Aseifa. Rav Chanina Misura, he learns it on the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah says, the bones, the sinews, the horns, and the hoofs, while they're attached to the animal, yalo. You bring them up on the altar. And these normally should not be on, they're just bones and horns and
But if you brought them up post facto, you keep them up.
Parshu, but if they were separated from the meat, from the animal, lo yala, you don't bring it up on the altar. They don't belong on the altar. You just don't have to remove them. And if they were attached, then you bring them up. But if they're removed already, if they were cut off, then you don't bring them up. The horns. This is only if it didn't start to get burnt already. But if you put up on the altar, and it got separated from the animal, from the meat of the animal, the hoofs, the horns, and it popped off the altar, so you still have to bring it up. You have to bring it back up, even though it's separated. Why? Because it was already scorched. It was already started to get burnt. According to the second way of learning it, that even these things that don't belong on the altar, but because they got scorched, you put them back up. So for sure, something that does belong on the altar, that falls off the altar, and it started to get burnt, you bring it back up. The first way of learning it, not necessarily will agree that the hoofs need to be brought back up just because they were scorched. They say that in Lav B'nei Akdara, they don't belong there. Okay. We're doing okay time-wise. Let's see the Mishnah. The following, Im Olu, if they were brought on the altar, Yerdu, you take them off the altar. Basar Kachi Kachim, the meat of Kachi Kachim, of a sacrifice that is meant to be eaten, and you put it on the altar, you take it off the altar. Or Basar Kachi Kalim, in the meat of a sacrifice of lesser holiness, you take it off the altar. Umaisar ha'aymer, what's left over from the aymer, which is also meant to be eaten.
Wow.
I'm sorry, but how does this? What do we? First, we said if you bring something, we were trying to say before that you don't take it down.
Yeah.
It goes up, stays up, or
Right.
goes down, goes down. So
Now we're
you're
saying about things that don't belong on the altar at all.
Okay.
Those are things that belong on the altar, but they were invalid, so we leave them up as not to shame them. That you don't belong here. So, but these things don't belong on the altar at all. They're things that never meant to be on the altar. They're things that are supposed to be eaten by the Kayanim.
So the hoofs and
The hoofs have potential to be on the altar if they were attached to the animal. So while they're attached, you bring them up.
Right.
We learned one opinion that if it was scorched and it was detached because it broke off during the burning, and you could put it back up as well. Okay, but these are things that don't belong on the altar. What's left over from the Omer, I guess part of the Omer sacrifice was burnt on the altar. Shtei alechem, v'lechem apanim, or of the two breads that were brought on Shavuos, or the showbread that's replaced every Shabbos. V'shiyori minchas v'aktoros, or what's left over from the meal offerings, which are meant to be eaten, or the ktoros, which does not belong on the outer altar. You take it off. Hatzemer. All these things you take it off. There's a period over there in the Gemara, in the new Gemaras. The old Gemaras was very difficult to read because there was a rule here that the rule is that it gave you I would say the predicate before the subject. It said the following. You take that. You take off the altar, and then it lists all of those things.
Right.
Now, then it stops, and it starts to list the subject before the following predicate. But where do you put the period to divide those two?
Yeah.
Because we have the nouns all together and the two rules at the end. So Rashi clarifies. He says no, you have to stop right here and put it in. But the new Gemaras put a period in there. You see.
Great.
You see, otherwise we would read it. What's left over of the mincha, the ketores, the wool that's on the head. You can't read it like that. You have to stop. It's a brand new. Okay, next case. Hatzem. So all of the things that we said before, you take them off the altar. Hatzemer shebrashi kvasim, the wool that's on the head of the sheep. Shar shebezakan tiyashim, the hair that's in the goat, the goatee. Vatzamas, the bones. Agidim vakarnayim vatlafayim. This is the bones, the sinews, the horns, and the hoofs. While they're still attached to the meat, to the animal, yalo, you can bring them up on the altar. Shnemar vikter akayin asakol, the kayin brings them up. Pershu, but if they're separated, lo yalo, you don't bring them up. But shnemar, as it says, vasisa lesecha basar v'adam, you should perform the burnt offering, which is the flesh and the blood, but not the horns, the hoofs, and the sinews and bones. Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught Victor the Kayan brings it all on the altar. This is including including the bones, the sinews, the horns, and the hoofs. I could have thought that even if they're separated from the animal, you still bring them up. The verse teaches us you should perform the burnt offering, the flesh with the blood. Ibasar v'dam, if it's the flesh and the blood, yachol yachleitz gidem atzamis. V'yala basar legabe mizbeach. Maybe you have to separate the bones and the sinews, and you bring only the meat on the altar. Talmud Laimar Victor Kainas Hakol. It says no. You bring it all on the Kain brings it all on the altar. Haketzad. How is it so? How does this work out? We have contradictory verses. One verse says you bring it all. One verse says you bring the meat and the blood, the flesh and the blood. So how do we resolve this? So mechubarim yalu. While it's attached, the bones and the sinews and the hoofs and the horns, while they're attached, you bring them up. That's referring to you bring it all on the altar. Pershu, but if it's separated, afilu in bereshim mizbeach, even if it's on top of the altar, yerdu, you bring it off. Because the pasuk says only the flesh and the blood is what you bring on the altar. So the verses will be applicable depending on if they're attached or they're detached.
Okay, Rabbi, can I just ask how l'chatchila, the best way? How are you supposed to do it? When you brought up a carbon, you separated it, right? You only brought
I'm
the
not
basar
sure.
v'dam.
I'm not sure. I know it was cut up, but I don't know if they removed all of the hoofs. I don't know if I don't think they removed the sinews and all of those things. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Did they take off the horns? Did they saw off the horns before they brought the head on the altar? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I have to look it up. If it was sawed off, you don't bring it up. I don't know. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Man Tana deshamat leidamar pershu yerdu. Who's the Tana that told us, that says that if it's removed, these parts, the hoofs, the horns, that if they're removed and they're put on the altar, you have to remove them off the altar? Rebbe, it's the opinion of Rebbe. Tanya, so it was taught in a brisa. Victor Akainas Hakol. The Kayan shall offer everything. Hamizbeich on the altar. The rabbis, this is coming to include. It's coming to include what's offered on the altar: the bones, the sinews, the horns, and the hoofs. Vafilu perishu. Even if they were separated, you still bring them up. So what do you do with the verse that says you should perform the oila, the flesh and the blood? Lay malach is coming to tell you ikuli eilat machzer. What would you return onto the altar if it fell off? Only the offering, only the oila itself, only the burnt offering itself that began to become consumed. But you don't return onto the altar the basar. The basar you return onto the altar, but you don't return onto the altar the horns and the hoofs. But according to this first opinion, you bring it up onto the altar, but just if it falls off, you leave it off. Rebbe says differently. One verse says, Victor Kayan Esakalam is Becha. The Kayan offers it all on the altar. Reba, this is inclusive. It says all. One verse says you should perform the oila, the flesh and the blood. Meat, that's an exclusion. How do you have an inclusion and an exclusion? Mechubarim yalu. While it's attached, you bring it on the altar. Pershu, but if it's detached, then you remove it off the altar. We're talking about the bones and the horns and all of that. Pershu yalu v'chulu, etc. If it was detached, you don't bring it on the altar. Amar Reb Zera leishanu ala shepershu klapi mata. It says, the Brisa says that the bones and the sinews that's separated from the meat, even if they're on the altar, that if they're separated, then you take them off the altar. Reb Zera comes along and says that this means if they're separated, that you take them off the altar. That's only if the way they got separated was in a downward way, that when they were separated, they were removed towards off the altar. However, if they were moved closer into the fire when they're separated, you don't go up there and take it out. Aval klapi maila, Kuruvihu da krivo. Da krivo liikol. But if it was removed towards the upward, then it's getting closer to being consumed. Okay. The next two words is a little bit confusing. It says, there's two ways of learning this. This is interesting. There's different versions of the text here. Rashi says, we're missing some words. The way this Gemara does it, it says, a new quote, Vafilu Pershu. It's a new quote from the Mishnah. Even if it was separated, this was the first opinion of the Brisa before. Even if it was separated,
What's it? Yeah, we're really talking about it.
the bones, the hoofs, the horns, you still bring it on the altar. That's the way this Gemara learns it here.
בפרה אדומה שורפים את הכל, את העצמות, את הכל בפרה אדומה.
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
I
This
think
is-
they
that's-
should have a problem to burn everything.
Yeah, but
Fine,
that you have to
bones.
recognize that when you're talking about a paraduma, it's not in the temple. Paraduma was not done in the temple; it was done on the mountain nearby. This was a sacrifice in the temple. It's going on the mizbeach. It's a different story. Okay, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Hachi Kamar. This is what it means. As the question here is, if it's separated, you bring it up. We said only if it's attached, you bring it up in our Mishnah. And the Brisa says if it's separated, you bring it. Leishanu el shepershu. It was only taught that you take it off if it's separated. La'achar zrika. If it's separated after the blood was sprinkled. Aval pershu kaidem zrika. But if it was separated before the blood was sprinkled, asoy zrika v'sharitinu afilu mevad minay kata de sakina. If they cut this animal up before they sprinkled the blood, and they removed the bones and the hoofs and all of that, and then they sprinkled the blood, so then the bones, the hoofs, and were not even part of the animal when the blood was sprinkled. So it's not considered that it's a sacrifice that has to be treated with the holiness of a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice at all. When the blood was sprinkled, it was detached. You can take these bones and you can make them a handle for a knife. You can make bone china out of it and use it just for yourself. If the blood was sprinkled while it's attached, then it's eligible to be brought up on the altar. You cannot do that. This is a sacrifice. But if it was detached before the blood was sprinkled, that's a different story. Savar Laki Hadam Rabbi Yechanan, he holds like what Rabbi Yechanan says, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. We have this often. No, Rabbi Yishmael was earlier, but when the Gemara says Mishum, in the name of, it doesn't mean that he actually heard it from him. It means he heard it in his name. Nemar, it says in the verse, Lo Yiyah, to him it should be. It's referring to that the Kayan that brings the Oila, the skin of the Oila belongs to the Kayan. It says Lo Yiyah ba'Oila. It says the word Lo Yiyah, to him it should be. But Nemar Lo Yiyah ba'Asham. It also says to him it should be by the Asham. Ma Asham Atzamis Mutarin. Just like by the Asham, the bones are permissible, because an asham is eaten. And so the Kayanim are allowed to take those bones and do what they want with it. So we learn, Af Oila Atzmisam Mutar, because we have the same verse, it's called the Gzeir Shava, because we have the same phrase, Lo Yiyah, by an asham, which is the bones are permissible. So to by an Oila, the bones should be permissible. In a case where it was separated before. Gemara says, Mufni. This would only be possible if these two words are entirely extra. Mufni means open. It's open to learn from them. But if they're not extra, then they're not open to learn from them. Dilay Mufni, because if they're not open, if it's not extra, Mifrach, we have a very strong question here. Ma'ala Asham Shkem Basari Mutter. How can you compare? The flesh of an Asham is permissible, so the bones are also permissible. But the Gemara says, Lo Yiyah Yisera Ksiv. There's an extra Lo Yiyah, and therefore it's permissible, and you can learn from this that the bones could be used by the Kainim. Masav Ravada Barava has a question. Ravada Barava has been coming up often.
His father's name was Ava?
Yeah. In Hilchos Gittin it says that you always spell names, non-Hebrew names, you always end with an aleph. In Hebrew names you always end with a hey. In the Simanach, the way to remember this is Rav Ada Barava. Ava is a Hebrew word and ends with a hey, and Ada is a Aramaic word or Aramaic name and ends with an aleph. That's why all of those names, Freda, Hinda, Sprinza, all of the Yiddish names always end with the aleph. You don't have right. All the Hebrew names always end with the hey. That's how we do it. Okay, so Ravad Barava has a question. That's a side thing. Atzamis kachim, bones of kachim lifnei zirika, before the blood is sprinkled. Ma'ilam behem. This is kachim. You can have, there's me'ila la'achar zrika, after the blood is sprinkled. Ein ma'ilam behem. There is no me'ila. V'shel oila. But if it's a oila offering, ma'ilam behem la'ilam. There always is me'ila. Now, what's the problem here? It sounds like that the oila would never be permissible. We learned that by an asham the bones become permissible, and we're comparing an asham to an oila. That the bones are by an asham are permissible to a kayan. The kayan can make bone shine out of it, and we said the oila should be the same because lo yiyah, to him it should be. It says by both. But here we have a brisa that says that an oila it's never permissible. Ema v'shaloila. Yes, we have to read this differently. We should say bones of an oila perishu lifnei zrika, if they were separated before zrika, ein ma'ilam bem. There is no me'ila. La'achar zrika. But if they separated after the zrika, after the blood was sprinkled, ma'ilam ba'ilam, there will be me'ila on it. Pligid Rabbi Lazar, and he argues on Rabbi Lazar. Dam Rabbi Lazar perishu lifnei zrika. If they were separated before zrika, ma'ilam bem. There is me'ila. La'achar zrika le'nana v'le'im ma'ilam. After zrika, then you're not supposed to have benefit from it, but there's no me'ila. The way Rashi learns is that the argument is about if they separated before the zrika, if the bones were separated. According to Rabbi Lazar, there still is me'ila, even though they're separated from the animal, and according to the first opinion, they're separated before there's no me'ila. Okay.